We ready? Let me introduce our panel up here to start with. In no particular order, we have Darren Hall. He is our sheriff. Darren was sworn in as the 61st sheriff of Davidson County in September 2002, becoming the youngest sheriff in the history of our government. During his 25-year criminal justice career, not criminal career, but criminal justice career, Sheriff Hall has served as Davidson County under 3 sheriffs. He's on the National Sheriff's Association Executive Board and Board of Directors, serving as the organization's treasurer, and will become the first NSA president from the state of Tennessee. John Cooper is a graduate of Hume Fogg Academic High School, which is across the street where we were at the library there, right close to that. Worked in the music industry out of college before switching careers and serving as a legal assistant for a private attorney here in Nashville. And he and I both are graduates of the Nashville School of Law. Me a little bit before him, but he's a graduate of the Nashville School of Law. He began working on the council office in 2001, the Metro Council Office, as a special assistant, and moved to his current role, and he is director and special counsel, and he has just been promoted. He is director of law for Nashville. Dan Johnson. Dan Johnson was elected to serve in the first Louisville Metro Council from Louisville, Kentucky, in November 2002. He was reelected in November of 2006 and in 2010. Previously, he serves as 6th Ward Alderman beginning in January 1992. He currently serves as Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus and is a member of the Committee on Committees. Pardon my redundancy. Charlie Carble. Charlie was appointed trustee of Davidson County, our county trustee. You remember you talking about constitutional officers. Our state constitution calls for a trustee, tax assessor, et cetera. He is our county trustee. Subsequently, he's been elected by the voters of Davidson County for 6 4-year terms. Previous to that, he was director of finance for the metropolitan government. And you saw my dad in the film. My dad hired Charlie when he left the Navy to go to work for Nashville, and Charlie's been a public servant, great public servant ever since. Janet Miller. Janet has been a key player in Nashville's commercial real estate community for over 30 years. She joined Colliers Nashville as CEO and market leader in September 2014, following 21 years of service as a Chief Economic Development Officer for the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. During that time, she led a 10-county region's top agency for recruiting companies to the region and working with existing companies on retention and expansion projects. Talia? Talia is our finance department. She's our new finance director of the metropolitan government. She became the first woman and African American to serve as Metro's finance director. She is no stranger to the budget, though. She previously served as the city's deputy finance director, preparing and monitoring Metro's operating and capital budgets of $2 billion. So without any further ado, I'd like for Dan to start first, to let him tell you, you've heard about Nashville. Now I want you to hear about another experience in the Louisville area.
Well, anyway, I'm a city councilman from Louisville, Kentucky, and I was challenged to say that I didn't have any, when I first got on the board of aldermen in 1992, a couple of years later, the newspaper said I didn't have any vision. And so something they tried twice before, and apparently merger was very popular in the 70s and the 80s, as I believe Lexington was merged in Kentucky, and Louisville tried it but couldn't get the votes passed. And Indianapolis was merged, and Indianapolis is all one county. And what happened was I came down to Nashville and looked to see how it was doing, and it was all merged, and I got some ideas here. And I went back to Louisville and I wrote a plan for Louisville to be merged, and I took it with 27 different council members. We have 26. It changed a little bit over time. And I started campaigning for that in 1998. And I went to groups like this and told them, wouldn't we be better under a merged city, because we could probably provide services to you and get infrastructure out here and put in streetlights, because in the unincorporated county they didn't have streetlights. But we also had 83 cities in our county. And what's happened is Louisville is the only first-class city in Jefferson County now, and all the other cities are under Louisville. And it's worked out just fine. And we are now the 20th or 25th city in the United States with a little bit bigger than Nashville, with about 575,000 people, not counting the people in the small cities. There's actually 750,000 people in Jefferson County, but we're not counting the small cities. We're just counting the people in the unincorporated areas, and Louisville is our population. And we have done great things as a council. We went through all the laws and changed it. We've changed them around and put them all together between the county and the city. And the most interesting things is we've built a downtown arena since we've been there. I've been trying to get us an NBA team since a long time, and that may be coming up shortly. And we keep doing things on the Louisville City Council that you may be aware of. We're working with drugs seems to be a big issue. All y'all see that? We just did a needle exchange program. Have you heard of that? Where you take your needles in if you're on heroin or whatever and exchange them and get clean needles instead of buying it. And that way you get some idea of what people are doing and how many people are doing it. And that's a program that they're doing in Kentucky now that y'all may want to try, because I went to a block watch election night and all they were talking about drugs. And that's what's important right now. But anyway, being a councilman, and merger's better for you if you want to do it. And it's still hard once you get merged to get all your services merged. The police department was merged. The department that takes people to the hospital was merged. But the fire department's never been merged in Louisville. There's still 18. I tried that this year, and I was called an idiot for trying to do it. People love their fire departments. And so you have to worry about that as time goes by. But see, you can't provide insurance in the old city of Louisville. People get their garbage picked up, people get their street lights paid for. In the county, that didn't happen, and it still hadn't happened. And I was trying to get the fire departments merged because there's a taxing base there of 10 cents. The fire department out in the county, each separate fire department has 10 cents per 100. On the city, on their home value. And if that could have been done, I believe we could have increased a little bit, provide garbage to the whole county and provide services like that to the whole county. And that's what I'm trying to do, but I don't think we're going to get it done because people love their fire departments this year. But we'll see what happens next year. And anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of serve as moderator here for a few minutes. I'll start with Mr. Cardwell. Were you here before consolidation at all, or did you? Okay, so Mr. Cardwell was here before we consolidated in 1963. So obviously the benefits of consolidation are efficiency and cost savings through the elimination of duplication of services. Mr. Cardwell, how have you seen these efficiencies work in Metro, and how has consolidation been helpful in your role?
As you said earlier, I was here for the consolidation, which was in 1963, as the previous speakers had pointed out. The tax rate, the first year of metropolitan government, the tax rate was $5.70. 2 years later, we were able to drop the tax rate to $5.30. The reason we were able to do that is the water and sewer debt service was paid out of the tax rate, which meant that the consumers were getting a break, although they were still taxpayers. So what we did is we moved the debt service from the general fund to the enterprise fund for the water department. That was a huge savings on the tax rate. The other area that I found back in the 80s that was very important for the government is we would go to the bond rating houses, and we had a AA bond rating. They would ask us, why would we not want a AAA rating if we could get that rating? Basically, our thinking was if you go to a AAA bond rating, then you're going to have to build reserves for about everything in the government. And we felt like that we could take those reserves and spend that money for the advancement of our city. So we've never went for a AAA bond rating. I think today, in the years past, we were able to sell those bonds, the AA bonds, at a rate of a AAA bond from other different jurisdictions. So that was a huge savings for the metropolitan government. And then you have the consolidation of departments. That was a big issue, but it worked. It took 3 years to be able to make all the consolidations that needed to be made. We feel like that, since metropolitan government was formed, that we have been able to save on an annual basis anywhere from 20 to 30% on the cost of government. And that's been going on for 50 years now. And based on that, that's been a huge savings for the taxpayers. Our tax rate today is $4.51. So we've had, I would say, 15 to 20 tax rate increases over the years. But with the growth of the city and the county, with the consolidation, we've been able to save money for the taxpayers when it comes to giving service that we need to give. And let me say this, we have the best services in the country. I think if you talk to anyone outside of our city, the reason we have progressed like we have is we have good government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cardwell. Janet, along those same lines, you spent a good part of your career recruiting businesses to come to Nashville. How did having a consolidated form of government, did you use that to sell Nashville, or could you just describe how you use that?
Yeah, good one. I hate to stand in front of my moderator, but here, I'll do this. So, welcome to Nashville, everybody. So I'm Janet Miller, and I had the honor of leading economic development for 21 years for the city of Nashville. And you guys know we're in a battle for jobs across America, right? So Nashville, when these corporations, you see these signs downtown, UBS, Service Source, Lyft, Nissan, Bridgestone, those companies typically are looking across the country and selecting cities for a lot of different reasons. So after 21 years of listening to corporate executives talk about why they pick cities, I will tell you that it's a lot of things. You got to have a good business case, right? You got to have low operating costs, low tax environment. You got to have smart people. Everybody's trying to attract the young millennials. So there's a whole lot that goes into it. But in my experience, one of the things that's the most important for corporations that are looking to put hundreds of millions of dollars into your city is avoiding risk. They do not like to see risk in any city or community where they are going to be putting their roots down for many years. And political infighting is the greatest risk for a company to see as they're looking on where to put jobs. So to me, the benefit of having metropolitan government is we're in an area, how many square miles? 400 and... I used to know that. I'm a marketing person. That stuff leaves my head. So, but if you think about a 533 square mile area, there is one mayor. So when a corporation like a UBS that's put 3,000 jobs just across the street here comes to town, we bring them up to this courthouse. There is one mayor. So they don't have to worry about, okay, where's that political line and who do I need to work with on incentives. It is a city and county, it's one package. Whereas, and again, I worked the whole 10-county region, so I know how it works. In some of the other counties, you have to get the city package, you've got to get the county package, you got to worry about special schools districts. So it's much more of a patchwork, and there's something incredibly reassuring for a corporation who is looking at investing in your community to know, I'm going up to the courthouse, and I'm going to see Mayor Barry, and I'm going to work work on my incentive deal with the finance director, who's this amazing woman now, Rich Riebling, and it's just a very streamlined feeling for a company, not even thinking about the cost savings, right? Because at the end of the day, corporations are looking at their bottom lines, and if you have an out-of-whack tax structure or a kind of a bloated budget, they figure that out. So yes, I've used Metro government to sell for 21 years. It sometimes felt like an unfair advantage because we could always get those corporations to the decision makers and they could understand it. So I know it's difficult to do. I know it's a political issue and it's a difficult climate, but from a sheer wealth creation and economic development standpoint, I cannot think of a better structure than a metropolitan form of government. So there is my marketing pitch for the morning. So
Thank you, Janet. As Mr. West mentioned earlier, we have constitutional officers by the state constitution that you must have in the counties. Trustee is one of those, and sheriff is one of those. So Sheriff Hall, could you briefly describe how our system works and what some of the benefits and challenges have been?
Yeah, sure. Welcome to Nashville. My father was sitting where you was when I was growing up. He said he had a lot of fun on these League of Cities tours. He was in the council with Mr. West, and I was a little kid, and I would hear about all the fun they had. So it's good to see people really work. They had a lot more fun than you guys. They didn't come to these sessions, but. No, as John mentioned, I am the sheriff here. I think if you go around the country, you'll find, and I get a chance to do that in a lot of different capacities, but I think you'll find that maybe the two things that hang up cities issue-wise is law enforcement and schools. The history of metropolitan governments and trying to get it done, whether here or other places, those two things I think are always going to be in the conversation. I have a lot of friends of mine that are sheriffs around the country, and I can say there are big belt buckles and big egos. We all have them, you know. And when you take sheriffs, I also can say that about chiefs of police. They're my friends. I'm just not one. And you try to figure out how to work those duties out. As John mentioned, the state requires you to elect a sheriff in every county in the state. You can't remove that by instituting a charter. But what you can do, and what Nashville did in '63, is to try to delegate and decide where the line of responsibility between these two agencies is going to be, and try to make that clear. In '63, there was an effort, and of course over the years there are challenges to that you try to address as you go. But I think it's important, and just we've had this in court over the years, so I can speak to it from that perspective. But the main thing the voters wanted to do in Nashville in '63 was to remove duplication. We're talking, Janet's talking, Mr. Cardwell's talking about saving money and how do you remove duplication in services so the taxpayer is only paying one school system, one law enforcement agency. And so the courts here over the years, when challenged on the issue of where is the line of responsibility between the sheriff and the police chief and so forth, the overriding legal argument is you can't both do it. As simple as it says, you cannot both do it. And so what we do here is we draw not a line of city limits, but we draw a line of responsibility between where that happens. If you are, and I hope none of your colleagues were arrested last night, but I hear there was late nights and a lot of activities. But if you were in that situation, the city police officer would make the arrest of you and hand you to me. And we take everything from there on. And that helps and works for us in a very good way. From a liability standpoint, it's very clear what the line is. We do make arrests in the court-ordered situations, and we have a lot of law enforcement responsibilities. But it is not, and my friends in this, by the way, Louisville, Indianapolis, we've had many agencies over the years come to Nashville and come and sit down and talk about how does this work, at least from the law enforcement perspective. And I think the reality of it is you can do it several ways. People do it differently. Some places the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer and other functions are done by the department head, say a police chief. Here, the charter says that the chief of police is the principal conservator of peace. That just means he or she would be the major law enforcement officer, but is not the only one. Because we have to perform law enforcement functions every day. We just can't do the same thing. I can give you some examples of where that line is, and it may surprise you, but just think of this for a second. A person in Nashville, Tennessee, who wants to take out an order of protection, a domestic violence situation, and you want to be protected from another person, that is a civil matter. We do all civil work here, the sheriff's office does. So we pull up on the scene, we notify the individual, you are to leave this location, you can't stay within 100 yards of this situation, so forth and so on. That's civil. Well, when I leave and go away, and this person who has to leave goes away, our actions are done. If he comes back within Janet, within the distance he can't, that's criminal. And the police officer has to make the arrest. So just to give you where the lines are, it's very clear to us, very clear to the city. And why does that matter to you? Economics and dollars and cents, it's because we are much better at what we do. That's all we have to worry about. In most cities and most counties here in Nashville, here in Tennessee, they have to do both, civil and criminal. They have to learn how to serve civil process, learn how to deal with criminal law enforcement. And so we pay our officers less because they're not doing the full criminal law enforcement, but they're trained to do specifically that. And I tell my friends in the police department, you should be better at what you do, because all you have to do is the criminal aspect forward. So it separates the duties. I think it's a much more efficient system, and quite frankly, I think it's overall better for the city, but it can work obviously in several ways. I just think law enforcement has to be at the table when you make those decisions.
Thank you, Sheriff Hall. Talia, we'll go to you next. You are the finance director, but before being finance director, you were the deputy director and responsible for the Office of Management and Budget for many years. How have you viewed the system that Metro has had? Now, obviously, you and I came in after consolidation.
That's a good thing.
But
1963, that's a good thing.
In your opinion, from a purely budgetary standpoint, how do you see things working?
Okay. Welcome to Nashville. I'm originally from East Tennessee, so if you all will get the benefit of hearing some of my twang from East Tennessee, so my accent is a little bit more pronounced than probably some of the others up here. Consolidation was absolutely the right thing to do from a budgetary perspective. Everything that Mr. Cardwell mentioned, the savings are real. The elimination of the duplication of services are real. They are quantifiable, and I think also qualitative. I mean, you can show results that it has been positive for this city. On the flip side of that, it has presented 50 years down the road some challenges from a finance and budgeting perspective, because with the consolidation, we ended up with 2 taxing districts. We have what we refer to as a general services district and a urban services district. The GSD covers the entire county, and the USD covers the urban core, and the folks in that area pay a premium for additional services in the government. Sometimes constituents don't understand the difference. They don't see a difference in the services that are being provided. And sometimes that's a hard explanation to take from a tax perspective, and Mr. Cardwell could probably address that because his office would get those questions. And he can follow up with that. Another kind of unique thing that we have is we have satellite cities. And these satellite cities actually pay the GSD rate, but then they, if I'm not mistaken, they set their own individual rates for particular services above the GSD rate. And Metro is not involved in any portion of that at all. And we have 7? There's 7 of those. So, and sometimes there can be debate amongst those satellite cities on who's providing what services, and particularly when you're getting close to a particular line. And that came up a lot when the flood happened in Nashville. And we were in the middle of flood recovery. People were out there with their measuring sticks and their GPS coordinates trying to determine exactly where the property was, and if it was in these various taxing districts and who was responsible for it. So there are some unique things about how it was implemented all those years ago, but I wouldn't want to lead you with the impression that everything is perfect. There could probably be some tweaks along the way. Also, within that 50 years, I mentioned this GSD and USD, there have been various annexation efforts because certain areas of the county have been interested in receiving the extra services that are provided from a USD perspective. So from administratively, it just presents some unique challenges when you think about those taxing districts, but I wouldn't recommend that anything be changed or that the government have taken any other approach, because it is really best for the citizens from a tax perspective and services that are provided. And from an economic development standpoint, one voice and what have you. So I'm in full support of it. Charlie, did you want to follow up on that? You look like you might want to have a comment about that portion.
I think the only areas when you mention or talk about the USD and GSD, the area that we haven't really cleared up even 50 years later is fire protection, fire service. Really, fire service should be a county-wide service. And today we still have it broken down, which that's something that needs to be addressed, but for some reason, a lot of politicians do not want to address that.
Next question out to the entire panel, and you can just kind of jump in. Only 1% of the counties in the United States have a consolidated city-county government. So it is a very small percentage. If it was ever, and this would apply for Nashville and Louisville, if it was ever put back on the ballot to revert back to a city-county form of government, do you think it would pass? And why or why not?
It passed with a large majority in 2000, and I believe that it would not. It would still win again. But I think that we have to provide services to some of the other part of the county, and that's what these people have been talking about. And even they haven't been able to merge all the fire departments like I'd want to. So.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. I would say that the business community of Middle Tennessee, not just Nashville, but the whole region, is overwhelmingly supportive of the metro government, because business in America today, I mean, I think everybody used to think it was all about golf courses and 4 martini lunches. Those days are over. Business is about efficiency. It's about shareholder value. It is about showing that you're being really wise with your dollars. So I would say the business community would be up in arms if we tried to go backwards because of just the sheer bottom line efficiency of the system, and I just don't think there's any way that would ever pass from a business community standpoint.
Yeah, I think, and I'm coming from one side of it, but I don't believe I believe it would pass. I think it's an overwhelming success here. I do think there are things that cities going forward probably would want to weigh out. And here's a great question: do you want your constituents electing the person who is responsible for enforcing all the laws in your county, or do you want the mayor appointing them? That is the root question when it comes to what we do. And I think there's arguments for both. Here in this county, the principal conservator of peace is the chief of police, who's appointed by a mayor and can be reappointed, obviously. But I think there's an argument out there, and I hear this a lot, both sides. I hear a lot of argument that, you and your community, wherever you are, the constituents like to have input in who is enforcing laws. For example, I believe the position should be nonpartisan. Here, it's partisan, and the election of this position, because I think you're sworn to enforce all the laws. And so I think it's fantastic here. I think it would be, you would never get it to go back here the other way. The efficiencies, the economics of it, and quite frankly, it's been in place, and most people are extremely proud of it in this town. But if you're looking going forward, I think those are real questions. Who do you want to put in such a position of law enforcement? Is it an elected position, or is it a an appointed one.
Okay. Likewise, this will go out to the entire panel. If there are people sitting out here who might be interested in pursuing consolidation, what advice would you give them on how to handle it, both politically and structurally? Oh, somebody has to take that one. Come on.
Charlie.
Most of you today saw the film down at the library talking about the consolidation of metropolitan government. And probably at the end of the day, as Jay pointed out, we had 2 newspapers. You really need to get those 2 newspapers on board. But at the same time, it did not work when we had 2 newspapers on board. It worked when we had one person against it, or one paper against it, and one for it. I think you need to make sure that your county and city, I don't know how you're structured, but to make sure that you have the leadership in both of those jurisdictions on board to at least take a look at it and not just close the door. First time someone mentions the consolidation of metropolitan government, I've seen it in these other counties, they go crazy. They do not want to give up their turf. As we had in this county, we had a sheriff and a city police chief. Well, they were able to work that out. But you're going to have to work these things out because it just makes it a lot easier and less costly to be able to put those referendums on the ballot and not have to go back 2 or 3 times. That would be my advice if you are considering metropolitan government. Thank you.
If you want to consolidate, make sure you look at the economics of it. You have got to be able to demonstrate the efficiencies that are going to be saved if you want to move toward a consolidation. Was the question if you want to go back? I want to go back to that one too. I would say step away and don't go back because I didn't. I just think that is a very bad idea.
One thing which we haven't touched on, there are political concessions that have to be made. I got to be super careful here. We have our former council. We have the 3rd largest city council in America. Chicago, Nashville, I forget the 3rd, New York. You can debate the merits of a 40-person council or not, but I can tell you that council came together really because you're going to have turf wars. You are going to have people who don't want to give up their space. Redistricting has to be the most politically tinderboxes in the world. So there will be political compromises, and you may end up with a system that isn't ideal because political concessions really do have to be made. But you just got to know where to draw the line on that was a political concession we can live with, or it is a catastrophic thing that's going to doom us to failure. So you've really got to be bold in weighing those decisions out. And I think a 40-person Metro Council is awesome, Jay West.
Yeah, I think follow up, Janet's exactly right. By the way, it was just defeated again to reduce the size. The voters do not want to reduce the size here in Nashville. Many times has been tried. It won't happen probably for representation purposes, as Janet mentioned. But you guys have a huge advantage over what was going on in '63. There are places who have done it. There are battles that have been fought. There's lessons to have been learned and should have been learned. And Nashville, to its credit, didn't have a lot to go by and have learned a lot over the years. But I go back to what I said as it relates to this side of the world. I do believe going and visiting those cities and evaluating questions such as the political the capital that has to be spent to do it, but also, as Mr. Cardwell said, if every one of those entities at the top aren't going to fight to make it happen, it won't just happen. I mean, there's just enough to it. And when it comes down to who do you want in charge of the schools and how would that work and how do you do law enforcement elected versus appointed, I think those are huge questions that need to be explored as you go around the country, because Nashville's not the only place and we're not the only way to do it. But at least you have a roadmap to go look around, and I would really highly suggest doing that if you ever think about it.
Thank you. We've got a few minutes left, I believe, so I'd like to open it up for questions if anyone would like to ask something of the panel. Yes, sir. Mr. Cardwell said 1966. So we've had a consolidated system for years.
Louisville, we had something called busing in 1975 to redistribute the population across the county. And that busing was probably what prompted the school systems to merge, and it worked very well. And they still do some redistribution through busing today.
Can I respond also to that question? Metropolitan government came in 1963. We had a county school director and we had a city schools director. And it was worked out over a 3-year period that those two directors would retire. Then we brought in a director that would be over both systems and be able to help transition those into one system. So that's an area that, mothers and fathers have a concern about their school district. So that is something you really have to walk lightly with to make sure you make the right decisions going in.
Sure. Well, Mr. West has been one. I can speak from, I worked with the council for 14 years. I was the council office director until just last month, becoming law director. The council members here are part-time. They are paid $15,000 a year. And some of them, it is easily a full-time job. So because of that, you end up getting some who either are retired or have the flexibility to where they can do it. But I have dealt with many council members over the years who work a full-time job, and trying to balance the two is almost impossible.
We have two classes of council members, at large and district. Quite frankly, I was at large, and there may be some colleagues that will argue with me, but I did not do as much work as a district council person. A district council person, particularly on a growing district, you have community meetings, zoning meetings, things like that. In an inner city council person, they have meetings on safety and quality of life and things like that. So I did not see myself as working as hard as a district council member being at large. Five at large, 35 district council members. They sold that. The original charter that failed had 21 members. And a lot of folks thought in the outlying parts of the county that the money would stay downtown. And so at that time, they wrote another charter 3 years later and sold it that you have your district council member plus 5 at large, so you've got 6 council members representing you, not just one. And it sold at that particular time. I don't know if that'll work for your community, but in this particular instance, at that time, it sold.
Maybe just to go back to my dad was in the council for years. I always tell people the story. My mother added it up one time. He made 7 cents an hour. It was an incredibly difficult, and we were from a very average home. And by the way, I was in graduate school. I did research on who in the world would want to do this job up here, and I did. And I spent a lot of time, and it was when Mr. West was actually up here. And what you found back then, this was in 1990, late 80s, was that about a third of the people who were in these jobs, whether they knew it or not, it was a political stepping stone. And I'm talking because they ran for president in school, and they eventually, and by the way, they went on to run for legislature, it seems like. There's another third of the folks who were in it because they were semi-retired and had been Little League ball coaches, and they wanted to do something positive. And then the third were in it because they'd been in it a long time and kind of evaluating, and didn't know they'd stay forever, but evaluating where their next move was going to go. Two things have happened. We instituted term limits in '94. Which was, to me, one of the worst things we've done. It has been resoundingly defeated, trying to take it away every time, but I still think it was poorly done. And those council members, as mentioned, have lost. A lot of folks are very young today running for council because it is a part-time job, and if it's political ambition, or it's trying to balance, another life and family. And you see them this time. We had two that didn't run again because it takes a tremendous amount of your time and effort when you're trying to balance all that. And I think we've kind of got our government in a problem with our term limit issue. But that's my two. It's 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. Very difficult.
When I was an alderman between 1992 and 2002, I was paid $18,000 a year. And now as a council member, we're paid $45,000 a year. There's 26 council members with, each council member has 30,000 people in their district. So 26 times 30 is our population. And when you have $45,000 a year, that sounds like a lot of money, but in what's the main city in Wisconsin? They're paid $75,000 a year in Milwaukee. So I mean, it's all around the board.
We've got time for maybe one more question. Yes, ma'am. Tuesday night we were here until a little after 10. Started at 6:30. We have public hearings on zoning bills once a month, and that was what took up the bulk of the time Tuesday night was a land use matter.
What if I just about something?
We have committees. There are council committees, and those committees can hold separate meetings and invite the public to come address the committees. There is no opportunity to address the entire council except for public hearings that are required by law, which is for the budget and for land use matters.
Got 2 quick stories in closing. Number one, when I first got elected to the council, I was 32 years old, and for the first 4 years, I said one word every council meeting, and that was amen after the prayer. And about 2 years into my council term, the phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, you know when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, it ain't good. My wife handed me the phone. There was a gentleman at the other end of the line that had been consuming some very old grapes that night. And what was on his mind at that particular time of night was a pothole in front of his house. So I get up, turn the light on, which made my wife real happy, got my glasses out, got a pencil, paper, wrote his name down, phone number, address, thanked him for bringing that to my attention, bid him good night, and said goodbye. The next day, I called the director of public works and says, this guy called me last night, and there's a pothole in front of his house. Put it on the list. Don't do anything special. Don't send anybody out there. Just put it on the list. And he said, thank you. So I didn't think anything more about it, quite frankly. And all of a sudden, the director of public works called me that afternoon about 4:30, 5 o'clock. I said, I want to let you know that pothole got fixed. We had a crew in the area, and so we got that pothole worked out, and just want to let you know. I said, thank you. So I went home that night, had supper, watched TV, went to bed, and set my clock for 2 o'clock in the morning and called him back to inform him that pothole had been fixed. He never called me again, and probably never voted for me again either. But that's sometimes how you have to fight fire with fire. One quick story that sums up what a metropolitan government is. Janet was involved in it when Dell Corporation was going to build a facility here. It's huge, 1,200 people, 1,200 employees, high-tech jobs. And they were looking, Janet was negotiating. And Michael Dell wanted, like every other we've experienced other corporations, they had a laundry list of things that they wanted the city to do. They wanted to upsize the water line, upsize the sewer line, do intersection improvements. It was out close to the airport, and what they were doing is the plant is next to the airport, and so when they make a PC, they don't put it in a truck, they put it on a plane, and that's their competitive advantage. And so we had to improve the intersection out there, and it was going to cost the city about $13 million and change to do all those improvements. And so Michael Dell said, well, we want you to start doing your improvements while we're building so we'll be done at the same time. And then Mayor Bredesen says, no, we're not going to. And sort of taken aback, he said, how about if we write you a check for $13 million, you get your contractor to do all those improvements, and I bet you do it on time and under budget. One man said that. That was the mayor. And so we got the $13 million appropriated, wrote a check for $13 million, and we've got 1,200 people working for Dell out there. That's how a metro government works. One decision maker, Michael Dell. He liked that because he was the decision maker. He liked talking to the decision maker. And Phil Bredesen, our mayor at that time, a pretty interesting fellow. He's got a physics degree from Harvard. And when I was vice mayor, he did some rocket research, and he'd get real mad at me at meetings. I'd say, well, this is not rocket science. And he'd say, shut up, just shut up. So that's what metro government's all about. One person making a decision. Janet is just so right. Join me in thanking our panel. They're very emblematic of, if you have a merged government and they say, is it going to work? It'll work if it's run right, and these folks run it, and it's run right. Let's board the buses and head back to the convention center. You'll have to go through, those of you going to see the opening ceremonies, they got safety, security checks, since the vice president's coming in, so you might want to be mindful of that when you go to the opening ceremonies.